The year 1979 marked the end of Idi Amin's rule in Uganda, and the period following this was characterized by turmoil. Multiple different factors, including the AIDS pandemic, the Ugandan Bush War, and the Catholic Church becoming wrapped up in numerous scandals, all played a part in making Uganda a very unstable place. As a result of the instability and chaos, many charismatic people declare themselves messiahs who renounce the authority of the church and government. One such movement was the movement for the restoration of the Ten Commandments of God, which was founded by Credonia Murinde and Joseph Kibwetir in southwestern Uganda in 1989. Both men claimed to have visions of the Virgin Mary, which attracted many Catholic clergymen in addition to superstitious locals. The goals of the MRTC were to obey the Ten Commandments and preach the alleged word of Jesus Christ. One of their most prominent teachings was that to avoid damnation in the coming apocalypse, the Ten Commandments had to be adhered to very strictly. The group's beliefs about the Ten Commandments were so strong that they discouraged talking out of fear of breaking the ninth commandment, "Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor." Sign language became a common method of communication within the group. Adherents fasted regularly, and they were only allowed to eat one meal on Fridays and Mondays. Sex and soap were forbidden. They believed that AIDS was a punishment from their God due to people breaking the sixth commandment, "Thou shalt not commit adultery." The group's full set of beliefs were explained in a booklet titled A Timely Message from Heaven, The End of the Present Time. New members were required to read this booklet as many as 6 times. The movement's leaders declared that the apocalypse would occur on December 31st of 1999, and only the most faithful would escape eternal damnation. They taught that the Virgin Mary had a special role in the coming apocalypse, and that she was communicating with the cult's leaders. The group developed a hierarchy of what they called visionaries, with the leaders at the top and former priests below them. These priests served as the group's theologians, who served the purpose of explaining the leaders' messages. However, not everyone was happy with the apocalyptic cult growing in size and power. In October of 1993, the group was kicked out of Kanungu, the town where their headquarters had been located since the group's founding in 1989. This removal would only end up being temporary because the movement experienced a significant uptick in converts after a priest named Dominic Kataribabo joined the group. Dominic was very popular and had gotten a PhD in the United States, which made people revere him even more than they already did. He brought large numbers of new followers to the movement, and Kibwetir was forced to sell 3 of his properties, as well as his car and milling machines, in order to fund the expanding movement. By the late 1990s, the movement was located on several pineapple and banana plantations, where adherents lived communally on the land. Murinde claimed to receive messages from the Virgin Mary through everyday objects, and new buildings were being constructed to support the recruitment and indoctrination of new members. In 1992, the group was ordered to leave the village of Ruwashamer by the village elders, and they returned to the Kanungu district, where Murinde's father offered them a large property. In 1993, things started going downhill for the movement. Their school was closed due to a measles outbreak, and a prominent member of the group left the next year, taking 70 members with him. In 1998, the movement was shut down due to unsanitary conditions, use of child labor, and the distinct possibility that the group had been kidnapping children to indoctrinate. Unfortunately, the group was allowed to reopen later that year. With the new millennium rapidly approaching, the movement was scrambling to make their doomsday preparations. With 1999 coming to a close, the movement leaders urged their followers to sell their possessions for cheap prices and then turn over the profits to them. Work on the plantation stopped, and everyone gathered together on December 31st, poised for the apocalypse, holding their breath and waiting for the last moments of human existence. But then the clock struck midnight, the year 2000 began, and nothing happened. There was no apocalypse. In the following weeks, members started asking uncomfortable questions about their leaders, and many people demanded that the leaders return their money. Donations to the movement decreased by a dramatic margin, and the leaders realized that they had to do something to retain control. So what did they do? The same thing as every other apocalyptic cult when they realized that they got their end times prediction wrong. They picked a new date. No, they said. The apocalypse wasn't on December 31st of 1999. It's actually going to happen on March 17th of the year 2000. The movement leaders recognized the fact that there was no reason to believe their second prediction would be any more accurate than their first, so they hatched a plan to circumvent that possibility. The movement hosted a massive party in the town of Kanungu, where reports suggested that they roasted 3 bulls and drank countless bottles of Coca-Cola. The movement leaders brought their followers inside the local church and then boarded up the windows and doors. Just minutes later, nearby villagers heard an explosion from the direction of the church, and they rushed over to see what was happening. The building had gone up in flames, and the stench of burnt flesh was suffocating the town. A total of 530 people were roasted alive. In the aftermath, many of the villagers reported that they were unable to eat meat for several months because of the memory of that horrific stench. The police initially believed that the group had agreed to take their own lives en masse, but this hypothesis was quickly discarded. The 5 main leaders of the cult were all missing from the wreckage, which suggested that they had orchestrated the explosion before escaping. Investigators discovered that Dominic Kataribabo had purchased 50 liters of sulfuric acid just days before the party, which was most likely the cause of the explosion. The leaders had also announced that there would be a party on the 18th, the day after the explosion, which was probably a means of throwing the authorities off their scent. 4 days after the explosion, the police investigated the properties that the movement had owned and operated from, and their discovery confirmed their suspicions that the explosion had been mass murder. They found hundreds of bodies at various sites. Some had been poisoned, others stabbed. Medical examinations determined that they had been killed 3 weeks before the explosion. The entire scenario had been premeditated. The police announced that the final death toll of the movement was 924. The investigation was poorly handled due to the lack of forensic resources in Uganda, and researchers did not show much interest in the case. Over the years, some people have stepped in to offer new perspectives on the findings of the police. An anthropologist named Richard Vokes wrote a book in 2009 in which he argued that the bodies found on movement property were not murder victims, but rather the victims of a malaria epidemic from years prior. He cited the lack of autopsies and a witness who was a former member of the movement. The Ugandan government issued a warrant for the arrest of Kibutir and Murinde, but they have never been found. They remain on the run to this day, and who knows where they're hiding. "12-year-old Kei Chinan was the youngest of 3 children and the only son of his father, Kei Cheng-pan, and his mother, Taimi Na. Chinan was enrolled in the afternoon class schedule at Owen Primary School in Singapore. On the afternoon of May 14, 1986, Chinan was approached by a classmate named Wang Piwei, who offered to help carry his school bag because Chinan wanted to go buy something from the shops outside the school. Wang Piwei left Chinan's bag at the school's tuck shop bench under the assumption that Chinan would come collect it, but he was very wrong. Unbeknownst to Wang Piwei, he was the last person to ever see Chinan. The young boy simply vanished. 12-year-old To Hong Huat was Chinan's best friend and the only child of his mother, Tan Jia Kwan, and father, To Hu Don. Hong Huat lived with his mother in a house that was roughly 500 meters away from the school. On May 14th, Hong Huat told his mother that he was going to walk to school with Chinan, who was coming to fetch him. Jia Kwan stated that her son was usually timid and liked his mother's company in public to comfort him, so it was strange that he wanted to go to school without her. Nevertheless, she let him go, most likely hoping that this newfound confidence represented a positive change in his demeanor. That was the last time she ever saw Hong Huat. The boys failed to show up for class, and the form teacher noticed their absence. The school contacted their parents, who rushed to the school to investigate. It was very unlikely that the boys had skipped school on purpose because they were typically well-behaved and never missed classes. Hong Huat had actually ranked first in his class for the mathematics test. These were not troublemakers by any stretch of the imagination, which made their disappearance even more concerning. By 7:15 p.m., their parents had still not been able to find them, so they contacted the police. The police searched the estates surrounding the school for several days, but they found nothing. The authorities distributed missing persons posters across Singapore and urged the public to contact them with any information they had. The media publicized the case, which kept their names circulating. By 1988, the police had interviewed more than 100 people in connection to the case. The families of both missing boys were relatively poor, but they offered a reward of $1,000 for any information on their son's whereabouts. They increased this reward to $5,000 in July of 1986, and finally to $20,000 2 months later. In October of 1986, the managing director of the Singaporean branch of McDonald's, a man named Robert Kwan, announced that the company would be offering a reward of $100,000 for any information on the whereabouts of the missing boys. In addition, they helped to publicize the case, and they posted missing persons flyers at every single McDonald's outlet across Singapore. These actions caused the case to be referred to as the McDonald's Boys case. On August 27th of 1986, an anonymous informant reported that he had seen the boys on Pulau Ubin, an island in Singapore. The Criminal Investigation Department dispatched nearly 100 officers to the island, and they were split into small search teams who scoured the entire island. Nothing was found, and the boys remained missing. A few months later, Jiak Kwan returned to Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, where she had emigrated from, to search for Hong Kwat. She contacted a local newspaper and the Malaysian Chinese Association for help, and the Malaysian police conducted a search effort. In 1987, the Singapore police expanded their search effort to Malaysia and several other nearby countries, and the missing persons report was sent to Interpol. None of these efforts uncovered any new information. The McDonald's boys remain missing to this day, and it doesn't seem likely that their case will ever be solved. On August 14th of 1962, Patrick Skeena had a big day at work, although he was unaware of this at the time. Normally, his job would entail driving around neighborhoods delivering mail, but on this particular day, he carried much more valuable cargo. Patrick's truck contained $1.5 million in cash and silver certificates from Cape Cod banks, all of which was en route to the Federal Reserve Bank in Boston. He was accompanied by a security guard, William Barrett, who was armed with a handgun. As he was driving down Route 3 in Plymouth, Patrick saw a detour sign that was guiding northbound traffic off the highway onto Clark Road. He obeyed the sign, but little did he realize that the detour sign had not been erected by officials, and the detour was leading him directly into a trap. Shortly after taking the detour, 2 cars went screaming past the mail truck, then maneuvered until they were perpendicular to the road, blocking the way. A man dressed in a police officer's uniform flagged down the mail truck, and Patrick put the vehicle in park. In rapid succession, multiple men armed with submachine guns emerged from the cars, pointed them at Patrick and William, and ordered them to exit the vehicle. William had been taken by surprise, so he did not have enough time to pull his own weapon. Besides, the robbers were much more heavily armed than he was. Patrick and William got out of the car, and the robbers proceeded to tie them up. The robbers then hijacked the mail truck and drove to several unknown locations, where they dropped off the money that was inside. The robbers then abandoned Patrick and William in Randolph alongside Route 128. At the time of the incident in 1962, this was the largest cash heist in United States history, and that record would remain for 3 decades. The investigation spanned 5 years and was handled by both the FBI and the United States Postal Inspection Service. However, there was precious little evidence in the case. Even when the authorities offered a $150,000 reward for information, nothing new came to light. The Postmaster General offered an additional $50,000 reward, which also failed to generate any leads. The combination of these 2 massive rewards created an atmosphere in which numerous people were accused of the robbery, but none were ever convicted due to a lack of evidence. The media vigorously proclaimed the guilt of many of these people despite the lack of evidence. As the 5-year statute of limitations approached, the Postal Inspectorate and Department of Justice needed to step up their game, so they imposed a system of near-total surveillance on everybody with a history of armed robbery in the Boston area. Shortly before the statute of limitations expired, a federal grand jury indicted 4 men and 1 woman as the perpetrators of the heist. One of the defendants went missing right before the trial, and the others were acquitted. To this day, the missing cash has never been located, and the perpetrators of the heist remain unknown. A Boston mobster named Vincent Teresa wrote a book called My Life in the Mafia, in which he claimed that a man named John Kelly was behind the robbery. He also claimed that he had received 80 cents on the dollar when the money was laundered. However, these claims have never been substantiated, so the truth remains a mystery to this day. Stephen Stayner was the third of 5 children born to Delbert and Kay Stayner in Merced, California. Stephen's siblings included 3 sisters and an older brother named Carrie. On the afternoon of December 4th, 1972, 7-year-old Stephen was walking home from school when he was approached by a man named Irvin Edward Murphy. Irvin was the accomplice of a convicted child named Kenneth Parnell, but not through any fault of his own. Those who knew Irvin described him as naive, trusting, and simple-minded, and Kenneth had convinced him that he was an aspiring minister. Irvin's job was to abduct a young boy in order to raise them in a religious household. Irvin believed that he was doing charitable work by abducting young boys for his friend, and he had no idea what the reality was. When he approached Stephen, Irvin claimed that he was a church representative who was seeking donations. He asked if Stephen's mother would be willing to donate anything to the church, and Stephen replied that she would be willing to do so. Irvin then asked where Stephen lived and if he would take him home. After this, Kenneth pulled up in a white Buick and Stephen climbed into the car. Kenneth drove to his cabin in Cathy's Valley, which was located just a few hundred feet away from the home of Stephen's maternal grandfather. Stephen was unaware of this coincidence, and he thought that he had nowhere to run. Kenneth began essaying Stephen, and Stephen told him repeatedly that he just wanted to go home. Kenneth claimed that he had legal custody of Stephen because his parents could no longer afford him and did not want him. Kenneth called Stephen Dennis Gregory Parnell, a name that he used to get Stephen enrolled at various schools over the course of the next few years. Kenneth pretended to be Stephen's father, and they moved around California numerous times. He allowed the boy to start drinking far too young, and he even allowed Stephen to come and go as he pleased. The risk of Stephen running away was extremely low because of the fact that Stephen thought his family had abandoned him, so if he ran away, he would become homeless and destitute. He was also unaware of how to summon help. Kenneth worked various menial jobs during this time. By sheer coincidence, Stephen's mother gave Kenneth a Manchester Terrier, which Kenneth then presented to Stephen as a gift. Stephen's mother had no idea that Kenneth was holding her son against his will, nor did she know that Stephen was alive to begin with. Between 1974 and 1975, a woman named Barbara Mathias lived with Kenneth and Stephen. According to Stephen, Barbara joined in on the essay. Under Kenneth's orders, Barbara attempted to lure another boy into Kenneth's car, but she was unsuccessful. She claimed that she did not know Stephen had been kidnapped. During his time with Kenneth, Stephen was forced to help with the kidnapping attempts. Stephen was entering puberty at this time, and Kenneth wanted younger boys to abuse. He believed that he would be able to use Stephen as his next accomplice, but Stephen was braver and smarter than Kenneth realized. Instead of simply going along with his captor's plans, Stephen actively sabotaged every single kidnapping attempt in which he was involved without Kenneth noticing. Kenneth simply thought that Stephen was incompetent. Despite his cunning, Stephen was unable to sabotage all the kidnappings. On February 14th of 1980, Kenneth and a teenage friend of his named Randall Sean Poorman successfully abducted a 5-year-old boy named Timothy White from Ukiah, California. Kenneth presented Timothy as Stephen's brother, but Stephen knew what their captor had in store for the young boy. He was determined not to let Kenneth hurt Timothy like he himself had been hurt, so he decided to escape and return the boy to his family. On March 1st of 1980, while Kenneth was at his night security job, Stephen left the house with Timothy and the pair hiked into Ukiah, California. They failed to reach Timothy's house, so they went to a police station instead. By the next day, Kenneth was arrested and the police checked his record. He had a prior sodomy conviction from 1951, and he was tried and convicted of kidnapping both Stephen and Timothy in 1981. Kenneth was sentenced to 7 years in prison, but he was paroled after just 5. Kenneth was never charged with SA because most of those incidents had either occurred outside the Merced County prosecutor's jurisdiction or were outside the statute of limitations. Irvin and Randall were both convicted on lesser charges for their involvement in the kidnappings, and Barbara was never arrested at all. Stephen remembered the kindness that Irvin had treated him with during his first week in captivity. According to Stephen, Irvin was just as much a victim of Kenneth's manipulation as he himself was. Stephen had a very difficult time adjusting to normal life. He said, "I returned almost a grown man, and yet my parents saw me at first as their 7-year-old. After they stopped trying to teach me the fundamentals all over again, it got better. But why doesn't my dad hug me anymore? Everything has changed. Sometimes I blame myself. I don't know sometimes if I should have come home. Would I have been better off if I didn't?" Stephen went through counseling for a very brief time, but his father told him that he didn't need it, so he stopped going. He was bullied at school because of the essay he had endured, and he eventually dropped out. He developed a drinking problem and was kicked out of the family home. In 1985, Stephen married a woman named Jody, and they had 2 children together. Stephen worked with child abduction groups to help prevent kidnappings, and he spoke to children about safety. On September 16th of 1989, Stephen was driving his motorcycle home from work when a car turned in front of him and struck him. Stephen sustained fatal head injuries from the accident, and he perished as a result. The driver of the car, Antonio Laura, was later identified by witnesses, and he was sentenced to 3 months in prison for the hit and run, but he was found not guilty of manslaughter. There were 500 guests at Stephen's funeral, and Timothy White was a pallbearer. In 2004, Kenneth was accused and convicted of paying his caretaker's sister $500 to abduct a young boy for him. Timothy testified against Kenneth at the trial, and Kenneth was given 25 years to life in prison. He passed away from natural causes at the California Medical Facility in Vacaville on January 21st of 2008. Timothy became a deputy for the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Office, and he passed away on April 1st of 2010 at age 35 from a pulmonary embolism, which is a medical condition in which an artery in the lungs gets blocked by a substance that has moved through the bloodstream. However, this case isn't done just yet. The Stayner family had one more nasty surprise to go through. In February of 1999, 42-year-old Carol Sund and her 15-year-old daughter Julie were on vacation with a 16-year-old foreign exchange student named Silvina Peloso. They were staying at the Cedar Lodge in El Portal, California, near Yosemite National Park. They mysteriously vanished during their stay, and the police launched an investigation. The next month, their rental car was found torched in a remote area several hours away from the motel with the charred corpses of Carol and Silvina in the trunk. Shortly after this discovery, the police received a letter that read, "We had fun with this one." In addition, the letter contained directions to Julie's body, which was located about an hour away from the rental car. Police interviewed numerous people during the investigation, including Carrie Stayner, Stephen's older brother. Carrie worked as a handyman at the Cedar Lodge, but the police did not suspect him of being involved in the triple murder. However, this would eventually change. On July 22nd of 1999, the decapitated body of a 26-year-old Yosemite naturalist named Joey Armstrong was found near the cabin she had been living in. Police learned about a car that had been seen at the cabin on the day in question, and they traced the vehicle to Carrie Stayner. During an interrogation, Carrie confessed to murdering all 4 victims, and he pled guilty to the following charges in relation to Joey's murder: first-degree murder, kidnapping, and attempted aggravated SA. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. At his second trial, Carrie was found guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of kidnapping, and he was sentenced to death. As of 2023, which is the most recent source I was able to find, Carrie was 62 years old and still living on death row.
Bik Ha Pan and her eventual husband, Hue Han Pan, were Chinese refugees who emigrated from Vietnam to Canada in 1979. They got married in Toronto and lived in Scarborough, where they had a daughter in 1986. They named her Jennifer. The Pan couple worked at an auto parts manufacturer in Aurora, and by 2004 they had saved up enough money to purchase a house in Markham, an area with a large Asian population. Fast forward to November 8th of 2010, when Jennifer came home and left the front door of her house unlocked, then went to bed. Shortly after this, 2 men entered the house together while a third man remained in the car as the getaway driver. The men dragged Bik and Han out of bed, demanded all the money in the house, then forced the couple into the basement. This is where they shot the couple multiple times. Bik perished on the scene while Han managed to survive. The intruders tied Jennifer up, but she managed to call the police. Han was taken to Markham Stouffville Hospital, then was moved by helicopter to Sunnybrook Hospital. The initial theory in the case was that the intruders had been attracted to the family by their wealth, but they quickly became suspicious when they found several items of value that had not been stolen. It was also suspicious that Jennifer had supposedly been tied up but was unharmed, and she had somehow managed to call the police despite her restraints. Han eventually woke up from his coma, and he told the police that he had seen his own daughter speaking with one of the hitmen in a friendly manner. Jennifer was arrested on November 22nd of 2010, and she admitted that she had hired the hitmen, but she claimed that the plan had been to kill her, not her parents. However, the investigation into Jennifer's life story revealed something very different. According to those who knew them, the Pans had very high expectations for their children. At 12 years old, Jennifer took music theory, harmony, and figure skating classes. She wanted to become an Olympic figure skater, but this aspiration fell apart when she tore a knee ligament. Jennifer attended Mary Ward Catholic Secondary School, where she played the flute in the school band. Her parents were very restrictive, not allowing her to date while in high school or attend school dances. As a result of her parents' high expectations and the exorbitant amount of pressure she faced, Jennifer developed a habit of forging her report cards. She managed to deceive her parents into thinking that she received straight A's in high school, despite the fact that her grades were actually average. In her senior year, Jennifer failed calculus, and Ryerson University rescinded her early admission. Not wanting to disappoint her parents, Jennifer lied to them and pretended that she was going to attend the college. Instead, she taught piano and worked in a restaurant to save up some money. She told her parents that she had won several scholarships and even said that she had been accepted into the pharmacology program at the University of Toronto. She purchased secondhand textbooks and watched videos about pharmacology in order to maintain the charade. Jennifer got permission from her parents to stay near campus with a friend who was secretly her high school boyfriend, Daniel Chi Kwang Wong, who was an active weed dealer and pizza shop manager. Due to her parents' restrictions, Jennifer reached 22 years old without ever going to a club, getting drunk, or going on any vacations without her parents. Both Jennifer and her friends regarded her parents' methods as oppressive. While pretending to take classes at Ryerson, Jennifer told her parents that she had started working as a volunteer at the hospital for sick children in Toronto. However, Han and Bick became suspicious because Jennifer did not have a hospital ID or uniform. Bick decided to follow her daughter one day and discovered that Jennifer had been weaving an intricate web of lies. Han became extremely angry and wanted to kick his daughter out of the house, but Bick persuaded him to let her stay. Jennifer began working to finish her high school education, which she had not finished the first time around. Her parents encouraged her to apply for college after finishing high school, but she was forbidden from contacting Wong because, according to Jennifer, he was from a different ethnic background and her parents did not approve of their relationship. By 2009, Wong was sick and tired of dating Jennifer because he could hardly ever see her. He broke up with her and began dating another woman, which greatly upset Jennifer. She began expanding her network of lies and deception to her ex-boyfriend in addition to her parents. Jennifer told Wong that a man had entered her house and showed her a police badge, after which several other men rushed into the house and essayed her. She also claimed that a bullet had been mailed to her. According to Jennifer, both of these events had been organized by Wong's new girlfriend. In spring of 2010, Jennifer got in contact with a high school friend named Andrew Montemayor. She claimed that Andrew had boasted about robbing people at knife point, which he vehemently denied. Andrew introduced Jennifer to a kid he described as goth named Ricardo Duncan, and Jennifer allegedly paid Duncan $1,500 to murder her father in the parking lot after work. Duncan refused to go through with the plot. At this time, Jennifer and Wong were back in contact, and they allegedly formed a plan to hire a hitman for $10,000 to kill her parents, after which she would inherit $500,000 from them. They planned to move in together after the deed was done. Wong provided Jennifer with a SIM card and iPhone in order to contact a man named Lenford Ray Crawford, who contacted another man named Eric Sean Carty, who then contacted a third man named David Milvaganam. It was also discovered that Jennifer had spoken with Milvaganam on the phone on the night of the break-in, and she also paid the hitmen $2,000 before they left the house. Milvaganam was arrested in April of 2011, Carty was arrested several days later, and Wong was arrested on April 26th. Crawford was arrested the next month, and Jennifer was held at Central East Correctional Center in Ontario. The trial began in March of 2014, and all the defendants pled not guilty to the charges of first-degree murder, attempted murder, and conspiracy to commit murder. The York Regional Police provided extensive records of mobile device movements and text message traffic between the defendants. The oddities of the break-in were also analyzed, and Jennifer's version of events contradicted her father's. Jennifer, Wong, Crawford, and Milvagnam were all convicted and sentenced to between 25 years and life in prison. Cardi's lawyer contracted an illness during the trial, which resulted in the proceedings being declared a mistrial. In December of 2015, Cardi received an 18-year prison sentence after pleading guilty to one count of conspiracy to commit murder. In May of 2023, the Court of Appeal for Ontario granted an appeal for Jennifer and her 3 hitmen on the grounds that the original trial's judge had incorrectly instructed the jury to only consider 2 scenarios that would justify a first-degree murder conviction, instead of allowing them to consider scenarios that would justify a second-degree murder conviction or a manslaughter conviction. The court upheld its original convictions.
Piotr Jarosewicz was born on October 8th of 1909 in the Minsk Governorate of the Russian Empire, which is modern-day Belarus. After finishing his education, Piotr began working as a teacher and headmaster in the town of Garwolin, Poland. Once World War II broke out, he moved to a Soviet-occupied zone of Poland, and it was rumored that he became a headmaster there. On July 10th of 1940, he was deported to Slobodka, Russia, alongside his first wife, Oksana Grigorievna, and his daughter, Olila. In 1943, he joined the 1st Polish Army, which was a subordinate military unit of the Soviet Union. The next year, he joined a Polish Communist Party called the Polish Workers' Party, and he was promoted to deputy political commander of the 1st Polish Army, which gave him the responsibility of educating his unit on politics and ideology. Following the conclusion of the Second World War, Piotr worked numerous jobs in the Polish government. He became the Deputy Minister of Defense in 1945, a position that he maintained until 1950. Starting in 1956, he was the Polish ambassador to the Council for Mutual Economic Assistance, which was a Soviet-led economic organization that focused mostly on Eastern Europe. Between 1952 and 1970, Piotr served as Deputy Prime Minister of Poland, and briefly as the Minister of the Mining Industry from 1954 to 1956. He was also a member of the Polish United Workers' Party, a communist party that controlled Poland from 1948 to 1989. From December of 1970 to February of 1980, he served as the Prime Minister of Poland, but his economic policies triggered a wave of protests in the later years of his term. In 1980, he gave up all party posts and was eventually expelled from the party. After Piotr left the political world behind, he settled down in the Warsaw suburb of Anin with his second wife, Alicja Solska. The couple was quiet and hardly socialized with anyone, mostly keeping to themselves. Piotr was obsessed with security, and he had a barbed wire fence installed around their villa. According to their neighbors, Piotr would often carry a handgun when he took the family dog on walks. Despite this, his paranoia was not enough to save him. On September 1st of 1992, Piotr and Alicja's son, Jan, traveled to their house to check on his parents. They hadn't been answering his phone calls, and he wanted to make sure they were doing okay. When he entered the villa, he found a scene of nightmares. His mother had been shot in the back of the head while his father had been strangled. There was also evidence that Piotr had been tortured before his death. Curiously, the killers had tied up both victims, but Piotr's right hand was free, as if the killers had required him to use it for something. An investigation into the double murder ensued, but it was downright bizarre. Piotr's insistence on security wasn't simply performative, he was adamant about keeping his villa safe. The couple hardly ever invited guests to their home, and only 3 people had keys to the villa: Piotr, Alicja, and Jan. To put this in perspective, only one of Piotr's children had access to the villa. The kids from his first marriage were never given keys to his home. Regardless, the killers had somehow managed to gain entry into the house, and they proceeded to spend multiple hours tying up the couple and torturing Piotr. A medical examination determined that they had used a sleeping agent on the dog to prevent it from defending its owners. The gun that was used to kill Alicja was Piotr's own handgun, and they had used a shepherd's axe to loop the rope that had strangled Piotr. At some point during the attack, Alicja had managed to injure one of the killers. Some of her blood was mixed with another unknown person's blood. Investigators also discovered that Piotr had received first aid during the torture because several of his wounds had been bandaged. The intruders had stolen 2 guns, 5,000 German marks, 5 gold coins, and Alicya's watch, but there were numerous other expensive items in the villa that had been left behind. There was only one room in the entire house that was messy, and it was Piotr's office. This suggested that the killers may have been looking for some documents, and Jan confirmed that several of his father's personal notes were missing. Unfortunately, due to police incompetence, hardly any other accurate information was gathered. The police stated that the killers had entered the house through a second-story window, but there was no evidence of this. They also failed to check the locks on the doors and windows, and they also ignored a smear that was present around one of the door frames. Lastly, there was a witness who stated that they had seen 2 men and a woman leaving the house in the early morning hours of September 1st, but the police completely ignored this witness. Nevertheless, a prominent theory soon arose in the case. This theory was originally published in a popular Polish newspaper called Wprost, and it suggested that Piotr was in possession of pivotal information that had been kept secret since World War II. He had allegedly been present at the takeover of a Polish castle at the end of the war, and this castle housed the Reich Security main office, which contained an archive of classified information. According to this theory, the missing documents contained information about the French-Nazi collaboration and even included correspondence between the French Prime Minister and Nazi Germany. There were also supposedly various documents that outlined plans to publicly slander numerous politicians. A documentarian named Jerzy Roskowski stated that stealing these documents would constitute a compelling motive for murder. But if that were the case, the other officers who were present at the takeover of the castle would also be targets. As it turns out, the other 2 officers who were present at the Reich Security main office, Tadeusz Stek and Jerzy Fonkiewicz, were both murdered shortly after Piotr and Alicya's murder. By 1994, 3 men were arrested and charged with a double homicide based on a confession that was given by an acquaintance. This acquaintance stated that she had overheard the men planning the crime. By the year 2000, however, all 3 men were found not guilty. In 2005, the investigation reopened due to the introduction of automated fingerprint identification to the Polish police force. The police had collected several fingerprints from the crime scene that did not belong to the victims, so they were hopeful that they would be able to identify the killers. When they tried to analyze these fingerprints, the samples were missing. A search effort ensued, with the police scouring their own archives, but they never found the fingerprint samples. In 2018, 3 more people were detained under suspicion of the murders, and 2 of them even admitted to being the killers. They were members of a gang called Karate, and they claimed that their only motivation had been financial. In 2019, the 3rd man also admitted to taking part in the murders. However, the legal proceedings were highly controversial. One of the defendants was involved in another unrelated trial at the time, and his lawyer stated that he had only confessed to the murders to get a more lenient sentence in his original trial. In November of 2019, all 3 men were found not guilty. At the end of the day, it's clear that the motive behind the murders was to obtain documents from Piotr, and there are 2 main theories on who is behind the attack. The first is more far-fetched, although some people still believe it to be the case. This hypothesis suggests that the Soviet government assassinated Piotr because of an interview he gave in the early 90s. During this interview, Piotr shared his controversial theory that the Soviet Union was using matryoshkas, or doppelgangers, to replace political leaders in Poland. In my opinion, this sounds like a downright conspiracy theory, and I think the second hypothesis is much more likely. The second hypothesis suggests that Piotr was assassinated by members of his former Communist Party. In the years just before the murders, Poland had separated from the Soviet Union and was becoming a democracy. Their first free election since the 1920s occurred in 1991, which cemented Poland as a democracy. If it's true that Piotr had possessed documents with information about former communist leaders, these men might have stolen them and silenced Piotr out of fear that the information would further strengthen their country's democracy. After all, the remaining communist leaders in Poland wanted nothing to do with democracy. To this day, the double murder of Piotr and Alicja remains unsolved. Which theory do you subscribe to, or do you have your own? Let me know in the comment section below. Blair Adams was the foreman of a construction company in Surrey, British Columbia. His acquaintances described him as cheerful, hard-working, and very skilled. He had previously suffered from a substance abuse problem, but he had kicked the habit and was out of Alcoholics Anonymous. His job took him to Germany at one point, where he started a relationship with a woman, but he eventually made his way back to Canada. He performed well on the job and was known for being optimistic. However, this pleasant demeanor started to change in the summer of 1996 when Blair began to experience mood swings. According to his mother, Sandra, something was obviously very much the matter. He hadn't been sleeping well. Something was wrong. I asked him numerous times what was wrong, and he said, "I don't think I should tell you about it." And to this day, I don't know what it is. On Friday, July 5th of 1996, Blair withdrew his life savings and emptied his safe deposit box of its contents, which included $6,000 in cash and thousands more in jewelry, gold, and platinum. His next stop was the Canadian-American border. That Sunday, Blair attempted to enter the United States, but he was stopped by border security under suspicion of drug trafficking. After all, he was a young, unmarried man carrying a large amount of cash and expensive items, so he fit the profile of a drug trafficker. He was refused entry to the United States. The next day, Blair showed up at his job, but he had no intentions of working. He asked his boss for his last paycheck, and then quit. That afternoon, he spent $1,600 on a round-trip airline ticket to Frankfurt, Germany. His flight was scheduled to leave the next day, but within a matter of hours, he once again became desperate to enter the United States. He showed up at a friend's house in a panic, frantically saying that someone was trying to kill him. Blair's friend was unable to get him across the border. The next day, Tuesday, Blair turned in his airline tickets, rented a car, and drove back to the Canadian-American border. This time, he made it through security and ended up in Seattle, Washington State. At this point, he purchased a one-way airline ticket to Washington, D.C. According to Police Lieutenant Jones, one of the detectives on Blair's case, he paid about $770 for a one-way ticket when he could have purchased a round-trip ticket for approximately $350 or $400. So it would have been half the price for a round-trip ticket as he paid for a one-way ticket. It just seemed very unusual. Blair arrived in Washington, D.C. that Wednesday, and he proceeded to drive to Knoxville, Tennessee, which is over 500 miles southwest of D.C. Another detective on Blair's case, Perry Moyers, said, "I mean, why go to D.C. to turn around and come back to Knoxville? He had no reason to be in East Tennessee. He had no reason to be in Knoxville. He knew no one in East Tennessee or the eastern United States." A witness saw Blair at a gas station in Knoxville at around 5:30 p.m. that afternoon. Blair complained to the gas station employee that his car wouldn't start. The employee told him that he had the wrong keys, but the rental car company was already closed for the day. Blair ended up being stranded in Knoxville until the next morning, but he managed to hitch a ride to a nearby hotel. An employee of the hotel who saw Blair stated that the best way to describe him would be paranoid. He was just very nervous, agitated, expecting someone to come in on him even though there wasn't anybody there. I don't know who he was looking for, but he was waiting for somebody to walk in for him. Within the space of an hour, Blair walked in and out of the hotel lobby a total of 5 times before paying for his room. After this, he put the room key in his pocket and walked out the front door. This was at 7:37 p.m., and it was the last time Blair Adams was ever seen alive. 12 hours later, at around 7:30 a.m. on July 11th, Blair's body was found in a parking lot, badly beaten and lifeless. He was partially undressed with his shoes, socks, and pants lying on the ground. About $4,000 in American, Canadian, and German currency was scattered around his corpse. His fanny pack and duffel bag were both at the scene, still containing his money, jewelry, gold bars, identification, passport, and credit card. Blair's body was confiscated for investigation. The autopsy revealed that the fatal blow had been dealt to his abdomen, which ruptured his stomach and caused sepsis, but he had also sustained injuries to his head. He had numerous defensive wounds, and several tufts of his hair were missing. His stomach still contained remnants of meat, shrimp, and lettuce, suggesting that he had eaten a meal sometime after leaving the hotel. One of his shoes had been placed under his head like a pillow, and his hand contained a single strand of long hair, which the authorities assumed was from his attacker. There were no traces of drugs or alcohol in his system. The autopsy also found signs of SA. Investigators initially believed that the crime may have been sexually motivated, but there was no DNA evidence to prove this, and the findings of the autopsy were too vague to be of any use in furthering this hypothesis. Years after the fact, Sandra reported that her son may have been bisexual. She references a relationship he had with a male roommate. They acted a little strangely and giggled a lot, and it was kind of odd, but then he went back to a heterosexual relationship after that. It was easy for the authorities to rule out theft as a motive, given the abundance of cash and valuables at the crime scene. However, this left investigators without a plausible motive, and they had no idea who the killer might have been. 2 eyewitnesses came forward to report that they saw Blair on the night of his murder, talking to an unidentified man outside a Cracker Barrel near the Fairfield Inn. A composite sketch of this man was created, but it did not generate any new leads. Another tip came from a security guard who had been working a shift at a nearby business on the night in question. This security guard heard someone screaming at around 3:30 a.m., and it sounded like a woman's voice. This tip also led nowhere. Law enforcement performed DNA analysis on the strand of hair that was found in Blair's hand, but it failed to come back with a match. After this, the investigation petered out, and Blair's murder became a cold case. During a phone interview in 2017, Sandra stated that Blair had wanted to travel to the American South in order to attend the 1996 Summer Olympics in Atlanta, which were scheduled to begin on July 19th. It's unclear why she did not report this detail to the police, and investigators have never been able to confirm this claim. The murder of Blair Adams remains an unsolved and terrifying mystery to this very day. Hopefully some new information will be learned that can solve the murder, but until then, all we can do is speculate. In the early 1970s, Gary Matthias was stationed in West Germany as part of the United States Army. During his service, Gary developed a drug problem and he was eventually diagnosed with schizophrenia. He was given a psychiatric discharge from the military and he returned to his parents' home in Marysville, California. Gary began receiving treatment at a local mental hospital after he was almost arrested for assaults on 2 separate occasions. He suffered from frequent psychotic episodes, which landed him in the Veterans Administration Hospital, and by 1978 he was being treated as an outpatient with antipsychotic medication. According to his physicians, Gary was a successful patient whose mental health was genuinely improving as a result of his treatment. In addition to his Army disability payments, Gary worked for his stepfather's gardening business. Off the job, he developed a close friendship with 4 men who lived in Yuba City, California. 32-year-old Ted Weiher, 30-year-old Jack Madruga, 29-year-old Bill Sterling, and 24-year-old Jack Hewitt. These men had a variety of intellectual disabilities and were considered slow learners. They each lived with their parents, who referred to their friend group as the Boys. The favorite activity of the group was sports, and when they got together it was usually to watch or play something. They were on a basketball team called the Gateway Gators, which was part of a local program that supported people with disabilities. Their families described the men as gentle, friendly, and not the type of people to behave recklessly. On February 25th, the Gateway Gators were scheduled to play their first game in a tournament that was sponsored by the Special Olympics, and the prize for the winning team was a free week in Los Angeles. The 5 men had prepared for the game the previous night, laying out their jerseys and telling their parents to wake them up on time. That same night, they decided to drive to Chico, California, in order to watch the basketball game between UC Davis and Chico State. Madruga drove the group 50 miles north to the Chico State campus, and the men wore light coats despite the cool temperatures in the upper Sacramento Valley area at that time of year. The men were cheering for UC Davis, and they got their wish. UC Davis won the game, and the men drove to a market in downtown Chico to celebrate. They purchased snacks, sodas, and milk shortly before the market's 10 p.m. closing time, a detail that the clerk remembered because she was annoyed that such a large group entered the store so late. It delayed the closing process that she had to go through at the end of the night. Unfortunately, this was the last time any of the men would ever be seen alive. After leaving the market, they simply vanished. When the quintuple disappearance was reported, police in Butte and Yuba counties began a search effort along the route that the men had taken to Chico. There was no sign of the group, but this would soon change. A few days later, a Plymouth National Forest ranger told investigators that he had seen Madruga's car parked in the forest alongside Oroville-Quincy Road on February 25th. When he initially saw the vehicle, he thought nothing of it because many people parked in that area to go skiing. He only realized the significance of the car after reading the missing persons bulletin on February 28th. Investigators searched the car in question, which did belong to Madruga. There were empty food wrappers and drink containers in the vehicle, as well as programs from the college basketball game. There was also a road map of California that was neatly folded up. The location of the car was very strange, considering how the men had been planning to return home after the game. It was 70 miles away from Chico, far off any of the routes that led to Yuba City. None of the men's families had any idea why they would be at that location, especially given their lack of winter clothing. Madruga's parents stated that he did not like cold weather and he had never been up in the mountains before. Sterling's father said that he had taken his son to that general area once before to go fishing, but Sterling had not enjoyed it and stayed home during future fishing trips. The car was located in a spot that was at an elevation of 4,400 feet, just slightly short of where the road was closed off for the winter. The vehicle had become stuck in a snowdrift, and evidence suggested that the men had attempted to get unstuck by spinning the wheels. The police noted that the snow was not very deep, and 5 young men should have been able to get the car unstuck without a problem. In addition, the car keys were missing, but the police were able to hotwire the vehicle, meaning that there wasn't a problem with the engine or fuel. The police towed the car back to the station and continued their examination. The vehicle's undercarriage showed no signs of damage, which was very strange considering the distance that the men had driven up a poorly maintained mountain road. The police believed there were only 2 possibilities to explain this lack of damage. Either the driver was familiar with the road, meaning that Madruga had not been driving, or the driver had been extremely careful. Madruga's family stated that he would never let anyone else drive his car, so the former was unlikely. Furthermore, when the car was initially found by police, one of the windows was rolled down and the doors were unlocked, and Madruga's family said that it was very unlike him to leave the vehicle so unsecured. Search efforts were launched on the mountain near the location of the car, but a severe snowstorm caused these efforts to be called off. There was fairly extensive media coverage of the case, and the police received numerous reports of sightings from elsewhere in California. Most of these reports were dismissed as hoaxes, but 2 of them seemed more credible. A man in Sacramento told the police that he had driven up to the mountain because he owned a cabin there and he wanted to check the area before his family went on a skiing trip. At around 5:30 p.m., his car got stuck in the snow and he started trying to free it. He began to feel the early symptoms of a heart attack, so he climbed back into his car and kept the engine running. 6 hours later, while he was lying in his car and experiencing severe pain from the narrowly avoided heart attack, the man saw headlights coming up behind him. He looked out the window and saw a car parked behind his with a group of people standing around it. One of these people appeared to be a woman holding a baby. He called out to the group for help, but they stopped talking and turned off their headlights. A little later, he saw flashlights that also turned off the moment he called out for help. Following this, the man saw a pickup truck park about 20 feet behind him, then continued down the road. However, he also told the police that he was delirious at the time, so he couldn't be sure that his memories were accurate. The man's car ran out of gas sometime in the early morning hours, and his pain subsided just enough to allow him to walk down the road to a lodge. The manager of the lodge then drove him home, and they passed Madruga's car on the way. Wyher's mother stated that her son was not the type of person to ignore someone's cry for help, so she found this account very strange. The second credible account came from a woman who worked in a store in the town of Brownsville 30 miles away from the location of Madruga's car. The road on which the car had been abandoned would lead you to this town if you kept following it. On March 3rd, this woman told police deputies that 4 of the men, whom she had seen on a missing persons flyer, had stopped at her store in a red pickup truck the day after their disappearance. The store's owner corroborated the woman's account. According to the woman, she immediately knew that the men were not from that area because of their facial expressions. 2 of them were in a telephone booth outside the store while the other 2 went inside. The store owner also said that 2 of the men purchased chocolate milk and soft drinks. Wyher's brother stated that driving to Brownsville was totally out of character for the men, but the way that the woman and store owner both described the men's behavior was consistent with their normal behavior. None of the evidence gathered in the investigation was leading the authorities to any clear conclusions, and it seemed as if the case was bound to go cold. Several long months would pass before any more discoveries were made. On June 4th, a group of motorcyclists visited a trailer in the mountains near the location of Madruga's car. The front window of the trailer had been broken, and the motorcyclists were hit by an awful stench the second they opened the door. The origin of the stench soon became clear. There was a dead body decaying in the trailer. It was eventually identified as Ted Weiher. The authorities returned to the mountain and started searching the area near the trailer, and they found 2 more dead bodies. These were later identified as Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling. Madruga's body had been partially consumed by scavengers, and only Sterling's bones remained. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be hypothermia. 2 days later, Jack Hewitt's father found his son's backbone about 2 miles northeast of the trailer. Jack's shoes and jeans were also found nearby, which helped to identify the body. A deputy sheriff found Jack's skull nearby and confirmed his identity through dental records. His death was also caused by hypothermia. In an area about a quarter-mile northwest of the trailer, searchers found 3 Forest Service blankets and a rusty flashlight. They were unable to determine how long these items had been there. The only member of the group who was never found was Gary Matthias. The authorities assumed that he had not taken his medication, so they distributed pictures of him to nearby mental institutions. Weiher's body was the only one found inside the trailer, and he had been on a bed wrapped in sheets. The autopsy revealed the cause of death to be starvation and hypothermia. The growth of his beard suggested that he had managed to survive in the trailer for at least 3 months. His feet were badly frostbitten and his shoes were never found. Some of his personal effects were on a table next to him, and there was also a gold watch that Weiher's family said did not belong to him. The investigators were shocked by the nature of Weiher's death. The trailer contained an abundant supply of matches and paperback novels, which could have easily been used to start a fire and ward off the cold. However, no fire had ever been lit. There was also heavy clothing that had not been touched, and a storage shed nearby contained plenty of rations that could have kept the men alive for up to a year. Most of these rations had not been touched. There was another shed with a butane tank that had not been used, even though it would have kept the trailer warm. Weiher's family stated that he did not have much common sense as a result of his disability, so the lack of survival instincts did not surprise them. However, there was evidence that Matthias and Hewitt had likely been in the trailer with him for some time, so the authorities could not understand what happened. The men had plenty of food, water, and heat, yet 4 of them had still perished from hypothermia and starvation. Investigators began speculating about what could have happened after the college basketball game that fateful night. One hypothesis was that Matthias had wanted to visit some friends in Forbestown, and Madruga took a wrong turn that led them onto the mountain road. After this, they decided to leave the car and continue on foot. The day before the disappearance, a snowcat had been driven down that road in order to clear snow off the trailer roof. Police suggested that the men might have been following the snowcat's tracks in the hopes of finding shelter. According to this hypothesis, Madruga and Sterling died of hypothermia on the way to the trailer, and Hewitt followed soon after. After this, the survivors broke the trailer window to gain access. They most likely believed that the trailer was private property, which caused them to avoid using the rations and heat out of fear of legal consequences. After Weiher died, Matthias then decided to return to civilization by foot. This hypothesis has never been proven, although it's the leading theory on the incident. Do you agree or disagree? The most intriguing aspect of this case is the fact that Gary Matthias has never been found, alive or dead. What happened to the men, and why has Matthias never been found? We may never know the answers for certain.
Rico Harris was the oldest child of a basketball player named Henry Harris, who played as a forward for Idaho State and later met a woman named Margaret Fernandez when he played on a semi-professional team in Los Angeles. Margaret gave birth to Rico in 1977, and the couple soon moved to Oregon with Rico, where Henry had been offered a job. Most of the time, Henry was a loving husband, but on occasion he would become violent and abusive. This abuse extended to his children, especially Rico, even after the family moved back to Los Angeles and had 3 more children. Despite his rough upbringing, Rico always craved his father's love and approval, even into his adulthood, and this could very well have been one of the main reasons he excelled at basketball. However, Margaret eventually left Henry and took the children to Alhambra, California, the suburb where she had grown up herself. Without his father's influence, Rico's interest in basketball declined, and by age 15 he had stopped playing and was focused on beginning an acting career.
With this in mind, Rico and a friend attended Hollywood High School, which was a long distance from the family home. Regardless of the distance between school and home, Rico was always a presence within his family, helping his siblings to persevere throughout the hardships they faced. It only took a year for Rico to lose interest in acting, and he quickly returned to the basketball court. He used his father's address in Temple City to enroll in high school there for his junior year, and he became known around the area for his skills on the court. Most people who watched him play would remark that his talents were NBA level, and he had a bright future ahead of him. Before Rico showed up, the Temple City team was average at best, but he transformed them into a force to be reckoned with, and college scouts were drawn to Temple City. Rico was a fan of the LA Lakers, and those who watched him play stated that his style emulated Magic Johnson. Off the court, Rico was a fairly shy child, and he received poor grades, but after getting a girlfriend, his social skills improved dramatically and his grades rose until he achieved a 3.0 GPA. Around this time, he averaged 28 points and 15 rebounds per game, which was during his senior year. The Long Beach Press-Telegram recognized Rico as one of the best high school players on the West Coast. The former head coach of a basketball team at UCLA, a man named Jim Herrick, had his sights set on Rico, and Jim recruited the young man shortly before leaving his position. Unfortunately, Rico's performance on the SATs was underwhelming, and his scholarship for UCLA was withdrawn. During the 1996 to 1997 academic year, Rico was the MVP of the state community college tournament, and he even led his team to the state championship. He managed to play one season for a Division I college team, but for some reason he never made it past this, and despite considerable interest from numerous NBA teams, he never signed a contract. Rico ended up attending Arizona State under Proposition 48, which is an NCAA rule that requires a prospective student athlete to take classes without competing for their freshman year, and they can only compete in their sport if their grades are up to snuff. However, Arizona State is a long ways away from Alhambra, California, and without the support of his family and friends, Rico's grades suffered as well as his social abilities. In March of 1996, Rico was arrested on a charge of unlawful imprisonment alongside two other student athletes after two women claimed that the athletes had essayed them. Investigators eventually discovered inconsistencies between the women's stories, which prompted them to drop the charges, but Arizona State asked Rico to sit out for another year instead of competing. Exasperated with his ban from athletics, Rico returned to California and enrolled at Los Angeles City College, a 2-year junior program, with the hope of improving his academic performance to be able to play at Rhode Island, where Coach Herrick had taken up a new position. During his time at LACC, Rico played on the basketball team, where he averaged 16.5 points and 14 rebounds per game. NBA scouts frequently watched Rico's games, hoping that he would quit college and join the NBA when he was old enough to do so. That season, the LACC Cubs had a dominant winning record, only losing 6 games compared to the 30 games that they won, and they earned their first ever California Community College Athletic Association state title. Rico himself was named the championship tournament MVP. Following this success, Rico intended to go to Rhode Island and play for Coach Herrick, but he failed a psychology class after skipping too many lectures, which left him ineligible to play. Later that year, Rico visited UConn in Chicago and then returned to LACC afterwards. His experience at LACC the second time around was heavily saturated with alcohol, and Rico was known to play in basketball games with extreme hangovers. Nevertheless, he was still the best player on the team. However, his attitude took a nosedive as a result of the alcohol abuse, and the coach suspended him for disruptive behavior. Rico blamed the coach for not keeping the team in check. Rico's drinking only got worse as the season progressed, and his girlfriend broke up with him. Social isolation only caused his personal life to sour. Rico declared himself for the 1998 NBA draft, and although NBA recruiters invited him to a pre-draft camp in Chicago, he declined the offer and withdrew from the draft. In Rico's opinion, he wasn't ready to take on the challenge of the NBA with all the personal struggles he was fighting through. In September of 1998, Rico asked the basketball coach at Cal State Northridge, a man named Bobby Braswell, if he could join the team. There was a scholarship available, and Braswell gave it to Rico, who believed that Braswell's strict style of discipline was exactly what he needed to improve his personal life. Unfortunately, Rico descended into alcohol abuse once again, and Braswell suspended him. Rico also suffered an injury to his hip, which caused him to miss an additional 5 weeks of the season. Following this, Rico's performance became noticeably worse. He now averaged 10 points per game, which was the lowest he had ever achieved in his college career. Shortly before the end of the season, Braswell suspended Rico once again, this time for skipping a meeting with the coach, and that was the end of Rico's college basketball days. Rico began playing semi-professional basketball, still maintaining his hope that the NBA was interested in him. He drank much less during this time, and he eventually began a new relationship. In spring of the year 2000, Rico joined the Harlem Globetrotters, which seemed to fit his talents perfectly. However, just a month after he joined, Rico was driving around South Los Angeles with his girlfriend when he got into a dispute with some people, and after leaving his car to confront them, they hit him in the back of the head with a baseball bat. Rico fled the scene, but shortly after he started to experience intense headaches and problems with his equilibrium. At the age of 24, Rico was forced to leave the Globetrotters, and his basketball career was officially over. Rico returned to his mother's house, where he failed to find a job and soon returned to alcohol abuse. His mother told him to snap out of it, but Rico only fell deeper into the pit, experimenting with various hard drugs. Throughout the early 2000s, Rico was arrested more than 100 times, with public intoxication being his most common charge. After being released from jail, he would immediately start hitting the bottle again, and he resorted to begging in order to fund his addiction. In 2007, shortly after his 30th birthday, Rico finally had a breakthrough, although it came at a price. He overdosed on prescription medication and was brought to a rehab facility in downtown Los Angeles. Rico spent a long time in rehab, but he eventually recovered and moved in with another graduate of the program, a man named Wilfredo. Rico secured a job as a security guard, and he met a woman named Jennifer at a party. Rico and Jennifer soon became a couple, even though Jennifer lived in Seattle, and they started spending long weekends in one of their cities. By September of 2014, the couple began discussing marriage, and their conversations even included possible baby names. Unfortunately, Wilfredo resented his roommate's relationship, and there was frequent conflict in the home, and Rico eventually moved out, leaving Wilfredo with several unpaid bills. Rico moved in with Jennifer, intending to relocate permanently to Seattle. This change caused some friction within the relationship, but they worked through their problems. Rico obtained a Washington state driver's license and scheduled a job interview for our position as a property appraiser, which was significant for him because it would be the first job that required skills outside of his athletic ability. Before fully planting his roots in Seattle, Rico decided to return to Alhambra to visit his family one last time. Jennifer believes that the purpose of this meeting was for Rico to get some closure for the difficult events in his childhood. On October 9th of 2014, Rico took one of his brothers out to eat and gave him a new cell phone as a gift, then returned to his mother's house to speak with her privately. His mother does not think that Rico got what he wanted from their conversation. Shortly after midnight, Rico departed for Seattle, where his job interview was scheduled for the next day. He drove north on Interstate 5, and records showed that he stopped in Lodi, California to get gas. At 10:45 a.m. on October 10th, Rico called Jennifer and left a message, saying that he was going up into the mountains to rest because he had not slept much recently. At 11:15 a.m., Rico turned his phone off, and he has never been seen since. When Rico failed to return to Seattle, Jennifer called his mother, and they decided to wait for a little while. At one point years before, Rico had briefly disappeared in San Francisco, so they figured he would probably turn up. By October 14th, several days after Rico missed his job interview, they realized that something was seriously wrong. Rico was reported missing to the Alhambra police. That same afternoon, a Yolo County deputy sheriff was patrolling a stretch of California State Route 16 near Cache Creek when he noticed that a black Nissan Maxima had been parked in a state county lot for 2 days straight. The officer looked inside the vehicle and saw several CDs, credit cards, and an assortment of papers. The car had not been reported stolen, and it was registered to Rico Harris, so Yolo County authorities contacted the Alhambra police. Law enforcement performed a search effort of Cache Creek Canyon, assisted by all-terrain vehicles, helicopters, a plane with a thermographic camera, and search dogs. Additionally, the area surrounding the parking lot was scoured and the highway in both directions was searched. After 3 days, the search effort was called off, and people were at a loss for how it was possible for the authorities to find nothing. Rico was 6'9" and weighed 300 pounds, so it wasn't like anybody could simply not see him. Rico's description was circulated to the public, and this resulted in a possible sighting on October 11th. A passerby allegedly witnessed a man who matched Rico's description walking along Route 16 at 5:30 p.m. Another alleged witness claimed to have seen a man sitting on a guardrail and staring at the creek. The authorities towed Rico's car and examined it, determining that the battery was dead and the tank was empty. Investigators found Rico's wallet, all of his credit cards except for one, and a Discover card, but his phone and license were both missing.
The vehicle also contained 2 plastic bottles, one containing hard liquor and the other smelling strongly of the same substance. On October 18th, another sighting was reported. A man who had driven past the parking lot reported seeing a large man with light-colored pants early in the morning. The next day, investigators found a trail of fresh footprints leading from the parking lot to the creek. They also discovered Rico's backpack by the side of the road, just a short distance from the spot where a witness had allegedly seen him sitting on the guardrail. In the backpack were his phone and charger, and the phone contained pictures and videos placing Rico in that general area at the time of his disappearance. On October 22nd, the sheriff's office announced that it was scaling back the search effort, and divers were brought in to search nearby sections of the creek, but nothing more was found. The lead detective on the case, Dean Nyland, believes that foul play is not involved in the case, and Rico most likely stopped in the parking lot to rest. After waking up from a nap, the unresolved issues from his past started messing with his head, and he decided not to go back to Seattle yet. He then started exploring the surrounding area, but he got lost, and after he eventually found his way back to the parking lot, he discovered that his car was missing. At that point, he began walking through the woods to the nearest town. What do you think about this theory? Do you agree that foul play was not involved, or do you think that Rico came across someone with insidious intentions? To this day, the case remains unsolved.
Lars Mittank was born on February 9th of 1986 in Berlin, Germany. He grew up in Itzehoe and lived there his entire life. He worked at a power plant and was fairly social, with a good friend group and a girlfriend. He visited his parents frequently, and after his father suffered a stroke, Lars often helped out at their house. Everyone who knew him said that he was a normal, down-to-earth guy. On June 30th of 2014, 28-year-old Lars traveled to Varna, Bulgaria, on holiday with 5 of his friends. They stayed at the Golden Sands, a popular seaside resort just outside the city. One of Lars's friends stated that they mainly relaxed on the beach, played football, and went clubbing. It was a normal and rejuvenating vacation, and Lars was in a good mood. His friends did not notice any unusual behavior during the trip. However, this changed at the very end of the vacation. On July 6th, the day before they were supposed to leave, Lars and his friends were at a bar when Lars got into a disagreement about football with a group of German nationals. Lars was a fan of SV Werder Bremen, and the others were fans of FC Bayern Munich. Lars and his friends went to a restaurant after leaving the bar, and after they left the restaurant, Lars departed from his friends. He disappeared for the rest of the night, which was highly uncharacteristic of him. The next morning, Lars turned up at the resort and told his friends that the men from the bar had beaten him up. He claimed that he had an injured jaw and a ruptured eardrum, so he went to a doctor. The doctor advised him not to fly back home just yet with his injuries and prescribed an antibiotic called cefprozil. Lars's friends wanted to stay behind with him, but he insisted that he was fine and they could go home as planned. They reluctantly agreed, and they flew back to Germany on July 7th. Lars checked out of his original hotel and moved to the Hotel Color Varna for the night. The second hotel was much cheaper and closer to the airport. However, just one day after his friends left, Lars began to exhibit paranoia. While at the hotel, he called his mother and told her that people were trying to kill him or rob him and she should cancel his credit cards. The hotel security cameras captured Lars pacing up and down the halls, furtively looking out the windows and hiding in an elevator. At 1 a.m., he left the hotel, but then returned an hour later. Nobody knows what he did in that short span of time. Later that morning, he called his mother again and told her that people were chasing him and getting closer. The last time anyone saw Lars was later that day, on July 8th, the day he was planning on flying home. He texted his mother that he had arrived at the Varna airport, and then he went to consult with the airport doctor, who described his behavior as nervous and erratic. According to the doctor, he told Lars that he was in good condition to fly home, but Lars wouldn't leave his office. He expressed doubt about the medication he had been prescribed. At that point, a construction worker entered the office. The airport was undergoing renovations at the time, so this wasn't out of the ordinary in any way. However, Lars started trembling and suddenly yelled, "I don't want to die here. I have to get out of here." He ran out of the office, leaving all of his luggage behind, including his wallet, phone, and passport. Airport security cameras captured him running away from the terminal. Once he got outside, the footage shows him jogging away from the airport, climbing a fence, running into a meadow, and finally sprinting off camera in the direction of the nearby forest. That was the last time anyone ever saw Lars Mittank. Many people, including Lars's mother and numerous doctors, have suggested that the paranoia could have been caused by the cefprozil he was prescribed. The medication has been known to have psychotic side effects, including hallucinations and paranoia. However, the airport doctor reported that Lars had not been taking the medicine, and he hadn't even filled out the prescription. The doctor was extremely confused by the whole ordeal. Lars's mother stated that he never had any issues with mental illness, but other people have suggested that he could have had a mental illness that simply went undiagnosed. Besides the mental breakdown, it is also unknown what happened to Lars after he ran away from the airport. Lars's mother hired a private investigator named Andreas to find her son. Andreas checked hospital records, but Lars was nowhere to be found. He had some experience with hunting, fishing, and trapping, but it is not likely that he could have survived for long in the wild. About a year after Lars's disappearance, a Bulgarian truck driver thought he saw the missing man in Varna. This account was never confirmed. In 2019, a German truck driver gave a ride to a hitchhiker from Dresden to Schildau, and he said that the hitchhiker bore a strong resemblance to Lars. According to the truck driver, the hitchhiker's eyes looked tired and his cheekbones were very prominent. Nevertheless, the bizarre disappearance of Lars Mittank remains a mystery to this day. Hopefully we'll find out the truth before long, but until then we have to wonder what happened to Lars that caused him so much paranoia, and what happened after his disappearance.